Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Mosaic podcast. And today, I know I say this every show, but today I have the honor and privilege not of introducing you to someone I don't know, but someone who has literally changed the course of my life. I look to Sandra Sedgbeer, not as a friend only, but as a muse. She has been the person that has redirected what I thought was an incredibly purposeful life that I'd been living for all these years. And she literally turned my purpose upside down by putting in front of me a purpose that was what I was really created here to do. And if any of you have ever worked with a muse, you know the power that comes through the voice of a muse that actually can hear you better than you can hear yourself. And this happened through the course of me coming to her unknown. She was a recommendation of a friend of mine, of another friend of mine, and I sat with her. And out of the goodness of her heart, she just sat with me. And I told her this book that I wanted to write, and she looked at me and she said, Danny, the ideas in this book are fabulous, but this isn't your book. And I remember saying to her, like, do you think I plagiarized it? Like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? And she said, no, the ideas are fresh and relevant and good. But this is a self-help book you wrote. And you're not a self-help person. And I said, what are you talking about? I worked for 10 years at Hay House. And she said, I know, but you're a storyteller, Danny. Why don't you write a story? And I fought her for about a minute and a half. I mean, violently fought her, because this was my legacy that I wanted to leave to the world. And I said, what do you mean telling a story? What am I going to write, a little fable for children, like a little children's book? What are you, crazy? And suddenly, in my own words and in her quiet, I said, yeah, that's exactly what you're going to do. You're going to write a fable. And in the same moment I thought it, she said, I want you to write a fable. And I sat with it and I thought, this is brilliant. And I sat to write a fable because I had written a book like that for a hotel called the Andaz, which was the most anticipated hotel opening in 2013. I wrote a story for them out of a story that they didn't ever have. I created a story and a storybook around love, which they still use to this day. And I thought it would take me a few weeks to do it. Sandie thought it would take me a few weeks to do it. About the second or third year, she said, okay, I'm out. I can't do this anymore with you. You're like, you got to go through this journey now. And I sat, and what finally happened for me, what I realized is, when I listened to the world around me, which is what the Mosaic was saying to me, the characters themselves that I had created. Now, mind you, these were based on real people, but they were not real in the story that I was creating. They were adaptations of those people. Those characters started to speak to me through the pages of the Mosaic. And I thought I was going crazy. But they kept preventing me from writing what I wanted to write. And finally, when I said to them, what are you saying after 3 years of trying to write this book? What's going on? Why do you keep blocking me at every phase? They said to me, you're writing what you think we should say. Just listen to us. Say what we're telling you we want to say. And when I did that, the process took to about 2 months to finish. Sandie was directly responsible for that. Also, she helped me to make it, sound good, and punctuations, and put all the nice flowery things in it that I just went right to the heart to do. But she did it in my voice. So that should be enough introduction for you, because this is my muse. And I encourage you to, in our conversation, to hear her and see if she might be your muse too, because that's what she does. I don't even know if that's what she would say she does, but that's what she did for me. So I'm going to read what her website would say a little bit about her, just so you don't have to base it totally on me. And then we want to just jump in, because this isn't a monologue, this is a conversation, okay? Here's what she writes about herself. Like all of us, I'm an alchemist, a magician, an artist, explorer, and a creator. I see life as a grand adventure, a play that can have as many acts and rewrites as I can envision. I enjoy trying on different faces and different phases, stretching my creative muscles, discovering different talents, and exploring the limits of my what if kind of mindset. Of course, if you read my CV or what people have said about me, you'll learn enough to start building some kind of picture of who I am. Like how I started my career as a magazine journalist, became an author and a conceptualizer, developer, and managing editor of magazines. My words now. All that's well and good, but for me, Sandie's my muse. She's the one that drew out of me the most important work that I've ever done. It's her patience, her kindness, her relentless desire to not let me get away with something less than what was possible that makes me forever indebted to her. She is the reason the Mosaic exists. And I thank her from the bottom of my heart for the experience of being able to work with her. Sandie, thank you so much for taking your time to come on the Mosaic podcast, and welcome.
Danny, I feel honoured to be invited, and thank you for calling me your muse. It is the nicest thing that anybody has ever said to me.
Well, I couldn't feel it more. You lovingly, patiently, painstakingly sat with me and showed me something in myself until I could see it. And there are very few people in the world that I know that have that ability. So if you, the listener, are stuck somewhere, if you feel that there's something you need, whether it be in crafting your book, whether it be in crafting your identity, whether it be in just living as a human being, I can't encourage you enough to go to www.sedgbeer.com, to go to her No BS Spiritual Book Club page that we'll talk about, to go to her radio show called What is Going Om, the flagship radio show for Om Times Radio Network, and just get to know this woman and see if you resonate, because she is extraordinary. And what we're going to do now, like, you know, if you've listened to the Mosaic podcast before, we don't give you the website version of Sandie. We want to give you the real person. I want you to get to know this person from inside out, not from outside in. You can go to her website and see what she is, who she is, and what she's done. The goal of this show is to just get into it. So let's get into it. You ready to go?
I'm ready to go.
Okay. Surprisingly enough, this one question gets people speaking quite a bit. What did your parents do?
I think my father died on his 36th birthday when my mother was 5 months pregnant with me.
Wow.
I think from what little I know of him, he used to be a manager at some kind of factory in the East End of London. He was a very smart, very good looking man, I understand. We've only got one photograph of him. Very jaunty, bit of a Jack the Lad, as we say in England, you know, thought he was the bee's knees, had women all over the place, according to my mother. And that's all I know. I don't know anything else about him.
Wow. And how about your mom? What, first of all, what did she do? How did she deal with that? I mean, how devastating to be 5 months pregnant with a child created with a man that she loved and have him gone.
Well, I don't even know if she loved him at that point. Wow. I mean, interesting. They met as children pretty much. And they started dating from the age of 14. And this was a long time ago in a very poor part of London. And they had to get married. She had a stepfather. Her father had died when she was a baby. And in those days, there was no social security, no way for women to survive unless they married another man. So her mother, and this sounds like something out of a book.
Right. I hope it will become one. I'm already in. We're not even in page 5.
Her mother married a man. I don't know whether she loved this man, but she had 8 children
Wow.
He had, I think it was 11 children.
Wow.
And they had one between them when they got together. So they lived in this tiny little house. We call it like a 3 up, 2 down terraced house, or this row of houses joined together in a poor part of London. And because the children span from 20 to 0, what they used to do was somebody had a night job and somebody had a day job so they could share the same bed. This is what my mother told me. She did tell me a few good stories. She had to get married because she was pregnant. She had, her stepfather was rather cruel. He was an alcoholic. And I think her mother had to forge his signature because she was under 21. So they got married in a registry office, not in a church. They had a baby. And I didn't find out for many, many, many years. I mean, I knew they'd had a baby that died, but I didn't know how that death came about. And when I discovered much, much later, I mean, I was well an adult at that point, it kind of shifted my whole perceptions about my mother. But apparently, my father had been in the war. He had been sleeping in tents. We'd had bad winters. He'd had pleurisy as a child. His health was bad. His chest was bad. And they get married. This is before the war. They have this baby. He's out of work in a depression. She says, well, I'd better get a job then. And he said, well, who's going to look after the baby?
Wow.
Didn't occur to men in those days that they could or that they should.
Right.
So she said, well, I'll put the baby in the nursery. And he said, if anything happens to that baby, I'll never forgive you.
Wow.
The baby died, crib death, in that nursery at 3 months.
Wow.
I didn't discover that part of the story until I was well in my late 30s, 40s. And it really suddenly made a lot of sense of who my mother was.
Wow.
Because she was a very walled off person. She hadn't had much love and she didn't know how to express love. And she loved my father, but he was unfaithful to her. He had girlfriends. She had 4 children after the baby died. And then she got pregnant with me, which she didn't want to be pregnant. And then he dies in the hospital. And a policeman came to the house, as they used to do back in those days, to tell her that her husband had died.
Wow.
On his 36th birthday. So, looking back over that story, I can forgive my mother for a lot of things that I used to resent her for.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. She was very poor. She had no income. She cleaned people's houses. My elder brother was 13 when I was born, but he was always, taking the day off school when he shouldn't be and off getting up to mischief with his friends. So my elder sister was pretty much looking after me. She was 8 years older than me. And the neighbours, because my mother was out working a lot of the time, the neighbours thought we were being neglected. At some point, my mother got behind with her rent, got evicted, and the 4 youngest children were put into a children's home. Wow. So from the age of 4 to 11, I was brought up in a children's home.
Wow.
And that experience has had its impact on my brothers and sisters, different on all of us.
Yeah.
I think that I'm probably the only one who looks at it as a positive.
Wow.
Because
so pause there for a minute. For people listening who can't even imagine how you could see that as a positive, can't even imagine a person that has the capability to see that as a positive, because I have to use my intuition a little bit. That same parent who said to their wife, well, if something happens to our daughter in that crib, I will never forgive you. sort of became the story. Like, look what happened to you guys as a result of being in a nursery, which is another word in English for a crib, right? Which is interesting. You know, how do you forgive something like that? How do you see positive in that?
I had a chance to have an education. I had a chance to leave the East End, which, you know, if you think about the worst part of New York, the Bronx, I don't know what the worst part is, but
Harlem,
you know,
something
to
like
get
that
out
used
of
to be.
that environment, we had a chance to see and experience something a bit different. When I was older and really began to develop my spiritual journey and understanding, I understood that experience as something that I'd chosen. And so how could you possibly not embrace it, you know, if you chose it?
Yeah.
Because I look at the things that it gave me. You know, I'm an observer. And from a very early age, I got the opportunity to observe all these children from different places and different experiences. And, you know, I had one particular experience. We were brought up as what's called Church of England. One of the children was Catholic, and so we attended her confirmation. I got an experience to go into a Catholic church at a very early age and listen to something that was a little bit different than what I was hearing in my own church.
Right.
And so I had the opportunity to weigh this up. And how can that contradict that? And maybe, you know, walk a different path than the one I might have done if I hadn't had that experience.
Beautiful. And so in the green room before we were coming on, I was telling you a little bit of a story around how I had this experience with somebody who was telling me I have this yeah, but personality, and that I would see the tragedies of things and feel overwhelmed by them and taken by them. And that there was a huge element on the other side of that coin, which is an appreciation for what comes through those experiences. That in the book that you helped me write, I mystically talk about what would happen if we could see what we don't see. But it sort of sits out there like a what? You know, but what I realized is how much power is in that statement, because we see a world the way we see a world. We see these tragedies that happen to you, and so many people would just stay in those tragedies. But what if we could see the opportunities that exist in those tragedies and appreciate that? What if we could see what we don't see? Because what we see actually blocks us from seeing what all that stuff, right? And so I love that we've sort of shimmied our way into this place. But I'd love for you, if you can, to talk about the glory and the beauty that happens when the life we've given is seen slightly from a different perspective.
Well, in order to address that, I need to tell you the other side of that. That's not to say that that experience didn't impact me. Totally. I mean, it made a huge impact on me. And I spent 8 years, pivotal years of a child's life, feeling like a second-class citizen.
How could you not?
Going to a school where other children who had their families and their parents and their homes, being friends with them and having their parents pity me. Be nice to me because but I didn't realize that until much later, and I didn't realize that that side of the experience was a big driving factor in my ambition. I always knew what I wanted to do. I always knew that I was going to be a writer. I knew that from a very I don't know how I knew it, but I knew it. At 4 years old, I knew it. But I chased fame and I didn't realize for a long time that I was chasing fame and success because I thought it would make me somebody.
Wow.
And I thought that the people who had pitied me would then be sorry that they'd pitied me.
Right. Well, did you think that they would be sorry they fitted you, or did you want to say, look at you, you fitted me, look at who I am. You don't need to fit in me.
Oh, of course. Of
Right.
course I wanted,
Right.
that was in my head, that was, the revenge, if you like. But what was so interesting about that, Danny, I did have a lot of success with the books that I published in England. I was on TV. My books were serialized in, the tabloids. I had a lot of attention. And I remember being in a TV studio. And I'd just come off doing an interview about a book I'd written. And the producer said to me, somebody called in who knows you. They knew you when you were married, and they want us to give you their telephone number so that you can contact them. And I took the number, and it took me back to the days when I'd been married and the life that I'd lived then. And I had this 3-hour drive or 4-hour drive back to London where I was living. And somewhere on that journey, I had a download. It was an instant. It was as if everything that I needed to know about something was condensed into a moment, and I understood it totally. And it was such a pivotal moment for me, because I understood that I'd been chasing fame for all the wrong reasons. And it suddenly occurred to me, you never know who's watching you.
Yeah.
So here's this guy who knew me, who's watching this TV program, who wants to reconnect. And the understanding that I got was all of those people that I thought would be sorry if I became somebody. Well, number one, how would I ever know if they knew that I was somebody?
Right.
They might not recognize me. My name had changed. I'd been married. And even if they did and they were sorry, how would I know they were sorry?
Yeah.
And what a ridiculous thing it was to be, driven by something that I had no control over. Yeah. And how stupid it was. And that was such a big moment for me that made me realize I had a lot of healing to do within myself.
Yeah.
And it was time for me to stop chasing fame for the wrong reasons and start going inward and getting to grips with who I am and what I'm really all about. And that was the moment that I really embraced a spiritual path and a belief system. Yeah. Before, I'd just been playing at it, analysing it, dabbling with it, evaluating it. But at that point, something happened that went from out there to within here that was, it set me on that whole new trajectory in my life.
Yeah. For those of you who are listening, I hope you will rewind and continue and listen again, because there is so much in what Sandie just said that needs to be unpacked, not necessarily in the conversation that we do, but in your thought processes around how this happens for you. Simple things that she said of, I just was sitting in a car and a download happened. Like, what even does that mean to you? Have you experienced those downloads? Are those flashes of intuition that you have? Do you listen to those downloads? Do you not listen to those downloads? The beauty of having somebody, and I'm going to say this to you and hopefully not embarrass you by how much admiration I have for you, to have a conversation, for the listener to be able to be a fly on the wall with someone I consider to be my muse, with someone who is wise beyond what most wisdom knows. And to be able to listen to her honestly tell you her story. It's less about the story she's telling you about her, even though that story is dramatic and fabulous. The story that she's really telling you is your story. And so as we listen to her speak and continue to go forward, the museness of what happens in this conversation is when the story she tells, which is exactly the brilliance that she casts for me in the Mosaic, becomes less my story and more the story of the one that's listening. And I want you to just mosaic this moment for yourself. Talk about downloads, if you would.
I don't know where they come from. I remember reading a book. I've done a lot of book judging over the years. And I remember reading one particular book written by a psychologist who I think had Asperger's. And I don't remember much about the book, but I loved it so much because he gave me one small piece. And it was that change happens. When you have an epiphany, when something happens to you or is downloaded, or you have a thought, or somebody says something that is so that for a moment there is no thought, that is the space where change happens. That is, and I've been privileged to have a few of those moments in my life where, you know, something drops in. It's as if somebody just says, here, look. And they show you a picture that when you try to explain it takes 5-10 minutes, but it was complete within itself in that second. And it is so jaw-dropping that the brain just goes zoom and stops.
Yeah.
And that little space opens up. And then it's, oh my God, yes. And you suddenly turn away and you've got a whole new perspective on life. For me, you know, I call them downloads because I don't know what else to call them. But I think really what they are is, in that moment, you are completely connected to your soul, to your higher self, to the part of you that knows more than you do.
Could it even be easier? Like, I love that. But for people that are not as spiritual as perhaps this conversation is going, could it be literally that moment where a perspective changes? Like, I keep thinking about that picture where you see the old hag when you look at it one way, and then within that picture is the young socialite. I mean, most of us know that picture. It's a black and white picture. Both pictures exist, but when you look at it, you see one or the other, until that perceptual shift happens where you go, oh my God, there's something else there.
You're right. I think it is. And I'm glad you brought that topic up, because if there's one thing throughout my life that has always fascinated me, it is perception.
Wow.
It is that you and I can look at the same thing and have a completely different story about it. And I can never get away from that. It's such a big fascination for me that it keeps me in a place where I am always looking at things through other people's eyes, because I know that what I perceive is only what I perceive, that there are all these other stories. And we can look at them in that, you know, from those angles as well. And we will make a perceptual shift. Yeah.
Yeah. And as you speak, I see your influence in the mosaic that we wrote, right? Because that's really one of the key components of the mosaic. I mean, it's highlighted by the blind woman who goes back to her village. And while she's gone, a healer came and blessed everybody in her village with the ability to see. But the healer said, you'll be able to see, but the things you see will be different. The colors you see will be different. So you'll think it's red, and you'll think it's yellow, and you'll think it's green. And for a while, the community was just so thrilled with the fact that they could see that they didn't care that one called it green and one called it red and one called it orange. But over time, they started to fight with each other. No, it's red. No, it's green. No, it's orange. No, it's yellow. No, it's black. No, it's blue. And the blind woman, when she came back, was not blessed with the ability to see at that moment. And she thought, if this is what seeing is like, if this is the chaos and fighting that goes on of people trying to sell their perspective to another person without the ability for people to understand it, I'm able to see all the colors because I can't see any of them. Yeah. And I realize now, in talking to you again and again, how much you opened that door for me. And I'm so appreciative to you.
You know, I've got to say this. I've advised a lot of people about their books. I've read a lot of books. I have never ever done with anyone else what I did with you.
Wow.
When I just sat with that original outline manuscript, the pieces that you'd written. And, you know, there's a thing that I always say that I believe very strongly, which is you cannot separate who you are from what you do in the world and how you move through the world. And that's another piece of the perception bit. I think that, you know, whether you think of higher self or soul, it doesn't matter. You can't separate who you are from how you move through the world. And at some point, if you're separating yourself, it has to come back together.
Yeah.
But I remember sitting and puzzling over what I was looking at and feeling so strongly, this is not it, this is not it, this is not it. And just knowing that you are a storyteller, but unlike, you know, rather than say, turn this into a novel, Danny, something, probably you informed me on some level that you've got this multiple perspective. You know, you had the ability to look at it the way I often look at things, from several different perspectives. And that is what you needed to do.
Love it.
So it's the first, probably will be the only time I will ever say to anybody, turn that into a fable, a parable.
Yeah.
You know, tell it from multiple perspectives. But that's what you have.
And I encourage you not to have it be the last time, because it was so powerful what you did with me. Because I bet there are people listening right now who long for someone who is able to hear who they actually are and not let them get away with being other than who they are. Not letting them live in that disconnect of trying to be something other than what is themselves, and bringing them constantly back. And you frustrated the heck out of me. You know, like we sat there yelling at each other sometimes, right? to the extent that we yell at each other, and you were just relentless with me. But I can't encourage our listeners enough to engage with Sandie, to allow her to do this magic. And it might be that that magic isn't what she does anymore. If she doesn't do it anymore, I am so sorry for you that you won't have that opportunity. Because what she does and what she did and what she can do is beyond book editing. It's beyond storytelling. It's literally bringing out the soul of a human being. And there's so many people that won't touch that. They'll talk about the periphery. They'll talk about the story. They'll talk about how you have to have the hero's journey, and they'll tell you all the things that you need to do, but they won't touch you. Sandie had the courage to touch me. I don't know what gave her the courage. I'm sort of a, you know, grumpy old guy, you know, but she just went in there, and I adore her for that. And for her to be surprised even to this day that I call her my muse only talks of her humility. So if anybody is listening to this show, or if everybody listening to this show longs for the opportunity to have someone really see you, have someone really hear you, have someone really excavate you out of you, to allow the disconnected you to connect, I'm going to tell you again, go to sedgbeer.com. I'll have the website listed below. We'll have her information of how you can get her on Facebook, all those stuff. But why hesitate? Why hesitate with this moment? On this show, often I introduce people that I never even met before. It's such an honor to introduce you, who I know deeply. And so, Sandie, what surprised you in the work that you've done? Like, if you could say, gosh, I never expected this, what would this be?
That's a hard one. Knowing how I lived my life when I was younger and what drove me then, and understanding what drives me now, it doesn't so much surprise who I am now, but it surprises the hell out of who I was, the person that I can still connect with and relate to, because I really did think that my life was all about me. And what I've understood with age and experience, through the incredible people that I've been privileged to work with and learn from, is how much pleasure, how much satisfaction I get out of just being with somebody and doing my bit to hold up the mirror so that they can see who they are. It's such a fantastic feeling, it's better than any drug. To be, I get more satisfaction out of that than I ever had out of publishing books and achieving ambitions. Just because in that connection, to be able to connect with someone and bring something out that I see, that they don't see, and show it to them. My mantra is know thyself. I'm a Gemini. I'm a 5 times Gemini. And the key words for Gemini is I know. And the most important thing for me has been to know myself. And I think the most important thing for all of us is to know ourselves. So to be able to offer people tools, processes, different things that I do that enable people to know themselves. Because, my God, that's what we're here for. And once somebody knows themselves, well, they're on their path. How can they not be on their path?
Totally.
That is probably the most surprising thing I've learned about myself during my life, is that I would get to this point where that gives me more satisfaction than anything.
I marvel in listening to you how much you and I are connected. Words that you're saying are words that I could say. And I'm starting to feel that in the process of musing me, you and I became even more connected. But I love that. And so in the world that we look at today, at least in the world that I see when I look out, I don't see a lot of people that know themselves. I see a lot of people that are carbon copying other success models. I see a lot of people that are telling people to write your book within a weekend and just get it out there. I don't see a lot of people that give much value to know thyself. And I see a lot of people that consequently have a lot of money, but don't have a lot of fulfillment.
Yeah.
Have a lot of friends, but don't have any friends. Have a lot of outward looking happiness, but inward unhappiness. What can you say to those people, if some of them happen to be listening, that would allow them to take down the wall of the story they want to tell other people just to show themselves and be able to show themselves and know themselves? Because that's, for most people, I think it's scary now to know themselves. They've invested into another identity for so long in their life, they don't even know who thyself is.
Well, we are heavily conditioned from the moment, we open our eyes, aren't we? And, I was just like everybody else. I wanted to be what, my whole childhood was pleasing other people because I wanted to be loved. I didn't feel worthy of love. And everything I was receiving was telling me I'm a second-class citizen, so I've got to do something to make people notice me. I think that the hardest thing is to realize that the only thing worth doing is knowing yourself. We can please everybody in the world. We can, do things for other people. We can do what we're supposed to do, what we think we need to do. Ultimately, what we're looking for, the peace we're looking for, comes with knowing ourselves and what it is that gives us pleasure, makes our juices flow. I mean, the first thing I do, if somebody comes to me wanting to be a client, whether it's for a book, whether it's, for a business, an idea they want to birth or ground, one of the first things I do is I look at their astrology. And I also look at other things that I know are very valuable in helping us know our potential, who we are, all of the potentials that lay in front of us. And I give them. There's one particular one that I do, especially when I give it to people and say, know this about yourself. They invariably end up in tears because there's a part of them that already knows it, but doesn't believe it. It's so deeply buried under all those layers of conditioning. I think being able to give that to somebody, well, Danny, you not writing your book the way that you thought it should be written, and then being given, try it this way, the difference in the way you felt.
Yeah.
That, there's the difference right there.
100%.
Because now you're on to something that is so meaningful, so rich.
Yeah.
And I think many of us feel that we're afraid to know ourselves because we feel, I might not like that person,
Yeah.
But, knowing yourself is accepting yourself with all your flaws. And I'm not perfect, God, anything but I'm happy with what I know about myself because it gives me purpose. It gives me my compass of, what it is that feeds me and how I want to be. And it's why I can't, I couldn't take somebody on just because they offered me, a bag full of money to write a book that I didn't believe in and wasn't them. I couldn't do it. It's good to have that compass because you've got, your boundaries, your principles, your ethics, what you stand for.
Yeah.
And, that's worth everything.
Something's coming through as you're speaking, and I'm going to just say it and you can throw it away. Trash can rule is really in effect in all our conversations, which means if you don't like it, you just throw it away or it doesn't make any sense. I hear a transition in you because I think I've always thought of you as someone who can pull a book out of a person. What I'm hearing is you're speaking now as maybe a different place. There's a wisdom in you that for people who want to write a book, of course you can pull that book out of them. But there's also a wisdom in you for people who don't want to write a book, but just want to know themselves. And I don't even know if you'd be willing to do that work with people, of just sitting with them and holding that mirror up. But I really feel like as the more we speak and the more I hear what you do, I realize how beautifully you did that to me, because the voice of the Mosaic was not the voice that I always spoke. It was a simpler voice. It was a more beautiful voice. It was a kinder voice and a more loving voice and a more accepting voice than the voice that I thought I always spoke, which was kind and loving and accepting. But now when I go back and read it, I sort of wonder, who is the person that wrote that? Because it starts to fit me now better than it ever did before. And so there is, for those of you who are listening who say, well, I don't know if I want to write a book, I can't encourage you enough to just contact Sandie about having her work with you to pull out you from you. If that comes in the way of a book, great. If it comes in the way of a song, great. If it comes in the way of just the way you do your work in the world, great. But you have a resource here. And you know me, I don't recommend a lot of people to people. I recommend this woman to you with all my heart. And It has been my honor to know her, my pleasure to have time with her, and to get to know her even more as a friend now, projectless, but just to sort of become friends with her now. And as I hear you, I hear parts of you that are coming out that I just want to share with people. We could talk forever, and we will continue off show to do that. How I end every podcast, and I will come back and end it by giving again your information after this question. But how I end every podcast is I ask my guests, when you look out your window at the world you see around you, is this the world you always dreamed of handing over to your children and your children's children?
Yes and no. When I look at what's going on in the world, and right now I'm in England, and we're like bookends with America, because the challenges America is having right now, politically and in many other ways, are exactly the same as the challenges, different identities, different people, different situations, but the same issues. What I see happening in the world makes me very sad, and I sometimes have fears for my grandchildren and what kind of world they're going to inherit. And at the same time, seeing from multiple perspectives, I also see that what is happening needs to happen. Mm-hmm. Because we've taken some wrong turns. We've developed some values, or we've lost values, let's say, and developed some ideas that aren't really serving us. And we need course correction. And I think, this is what we're getting right now. So I have a lot of faith in human nature. I think, yes, we all know there are some dark people out there, and they're very hard to understand. But I think ultimately, if we tear it all down, we see that they're just people who've lost their way.
Yeah.
And we have to have compassion for them, which is not always easy to find. I don't always find it easy. But, the bottom line is that we're all individuals trying to find our way in the world. And I really do believe that at the bottom, everybody, nobody wants pain, nobody wants hatred, nobody wants violence and war. And that somehow, some way, those qualities that lie within all of us will resurface, and we will find our way through this. And if not my children and my grandchildren, then maybe my great-grandchildren. I don't know. Yeah. I do believe that spirit within us, whatever it is that gives us our compassion and kindness and connection, will begin to revalue that. So I don't know if that answers your question.
100%. And I want to just thank you for. I love when a show comes full circle, because the situation that you were raised in, which seems like abysmal, you found goodness in it. It's not that you don't see what you came through, but this world that sometimes can look abysmal with all the betrayal and conflict and all that, there's a goodness to the world underneath it that is so exceedingly beautiful that we'll find our way somehow. There's a bigger hand at stake than the hands that we see. Yeah. And so for those people who, I'm going to say for everybody listening, forget about for those people who want to know more, because I can't even imagine anybody not wanting to know more. I want you to go to sedgbeer.com. The spelling of that will be in the show notes when the show comes out. I want you to look up and sign up, if people can sign up, for the No BS Spiritual Book Club. We'll give a link to that. That's Sandie's latest work of asking people that she knows that are wise people, ordinary people, regular people, for their 10 most favorite books that they have. I want you to check out What Is Going Om, the flagship radio show for Om Times Radio Network. We will give that link there as well. The greatest gift that I could give you as a listener is to introduce you to the greatest gifts that I've been given. And sitting with me now is one of the greatest gifts I've been given. And it's my joy to introduce Sandie to you. It's my greater joy if you take the benefit of getting to know her and allowing her to do her alchemy, be a magician, explore you, become an artist with you, and allow her to draw out of you that part of you that you never even saw existed, that voice that was in me, that when I wrote the self-help version of what I was going to write was really not my book, that gave birth to a new voice in me, that I'm constantly learning what that voice is telling me by just listening rather than talking, by hearing what it wants me to do rather than by telling it what I want it to do. It's rare that I say this is an honor and privilege. Sandie, it's an honor and privilege to have you with us today, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart for being on the show.
Can I say one parting thing, Danny?
Yes.
That's occurred to me as you've been talking is, all I did really was show you who you're not.
Yeah.
And then you were free to be who you are.
Well, that takes tremendous courage to keep holding up a mirror of who you're not to people who believe that's who they are. Mm-hmm. And so if there's anybody listening who's wondering why they're stuck, if there's anybody listening wondering why they can't connect deeper to something that they know they are, www.sedgbeer.com. That's all I have to say. It's my honor and privilege to introduce you to one of my dearest friends. And it's my honor and privilege to be able to call you one of my dearest friends.
Likewise.
Thank you. And for those of you listening, if you like the show, please give a review. Please 5-star it. Please tell your friends about it. Please subscribe on iTunes. And please contact Sandie. Until next time, live connected.